everyone, and welcome back to another episode of What the Forensics. My name is Nicole, and I am joined here again by the lovely Journey and Rebecca. This week, Journey is going to be taking the lead on the case study, so she's going to be telling us all about Reena Virk and what happened to her. Before we begin, I just wanted, our typical housekeeping stuff. Just wanted to remind you guys to leave a review or comments whenever you can. We love to read them. Like, subscribe, and follow us wherever you can as well. And remember that while we do try our best to research all of these topics, we can also make mistakes. We're still kind of doing this alongside you guys. We are actively learning. So we hope you enjoy learning with us. You know what? We're not professionals. We're doing this for fun and we're still learning too. But yeah, now that that is out of the way, there is a listener's discretion advised as we do have some conversations about an attempted suicide, sexual abuse, and severe physical assault. Now, Journey, I know you've done a lot of research on this one. So do you care to take the baton on this?
Yeah, I'm really excited for this episode. Also, apologies, I'm getting sick, and that's why my voice sounds like this. Yeah, so Reena was born on March 10th, 1983, in Victoria, British Columbia. I'll refer to British Columbia as BC from here on out. I realize that most of our listeners who aren't from Canada might be a little bit confused. So, yeah, British Columbia is BC. Her parents are Manjeet and Suman Virk. She was the oldest of three children with a younger sister and brother. Her name actually means queen, which is kind of cool.
Hmm.
Her family spent quite a bit of time traveling over the years, going to Lake Louise, California, India, Singapore, Malaysia, and Hawaii. And her family are actually practicing Jehovah Witnesses, or JWs. And her mom was raised JW and her father was raised Sikh, but converted not long after they got married. And so as Reena grew up, she began to kind of rebel against the faith because she saw it very joyless and strict. And she wanted to celebrate her birthday and smoke and wear makeup and wear tight clothes.
Honestly,
Just be a
obviously
teenager.
normal teenager
Yeah,
things.
Just
yeah,
normal teenager
exactly.
things.
Yeah. And so this caused quite a bit of tension between her and her parents, which isn't completely unexpected. And it wasn't until 1994 when Reena began to talk back, lie, pick fights with her mom, and become really easily agitated. There was a very distinct mood shift almost. But she was also entering preteens. Her mom's like, it's just hormones, it'll pass, it's a phase, whatever. Her father in his book describes her as, quote, not obese, just a big girl, end quote. Yeah, and because of her stature, she started to be bullied quite a bit. And so as a result, she stopped caring about her hygiene and appearance. She also started to make excuses and fake illnesses so that she didn't have to go to school. And then in junior high, she became even more sensitive about her looks. And like most teenage girls, sought peer approval above all else. Again, very typical. In May 1994, her family moved to a different suburb of Victoria called Saanich West. And this meant a change of schools for Reena, which her parents hoped would help with the bullying and allow a semi-fresh start for her. And for a while, they were right, and Reena was happy and participating in extracurricular activities and making friends. Of course, she still had sad and moody periods, but I feel like that's pretty common for a preteen. And then she ended up getting brushed off by her age group again, and she really began to suffer after that. She didn't really understand why they were mean to her, and so in her need to be accepted by her peers, she started to copy their looks and their habits, which is kind of an overarching theme of this episode. And in any of the because there's a book, a TV show, and then another book written about this case, and it becomes very evident in the book and the TV show that she's just trying to be like her friends and be accepted, so she's copying what they're doing.
Mhm.
In the fall of 1996, she started at Colquitt's Junior Secondary School, and this same year, actually, her family adopted a lovebird from SPCA and named him Smooch,
That's so cute.
which is kind of adorable. And he was only 3 months old when they adopted him, and he had recently lost his mate. And so they thought that giving Reena something to look after would be good for her and kind of give her a focus outside of herself. And then, yeah, Smooch just became part of the family and was kind of adorable. And they bring him in the TV show, but they don't mention him in the other book at all. And I was like, that's kind of sad. Like, that's her childhood pet,
Yeah, it's part of the family.
right? In July 1996, she met a new group of friends. And so she went to this park after supper and saw them sitting around and smoking. They invited her to sit with them, and she felt flattered and accepted. And then she got home late and told her parents about her new friends. And they kind of cautioned her about spending time with them because they didn't see them as great role models. And Rita did not listen to them and hung out with them again the next evening. And when she returned home, she was sent to her room to quote unquote do some thinking. And her parents were kind of shocked because they had never seen such an attitude from her before. It was, again, just an escalation. But they recognized that her need to connect with those kids was greater than any desire to please her parents. So they suggested that she invite them over for dinner so that her parents can kind of meet them. And then instead of hanging out at the park, they can kind of hang out at her house. But Rena was like, absolutely not. And nothing ever really happened from that. But this was kind of the first group of people who accepted her. And she really wanted nothing more than to impress them. And kind of, she ended up idolizing not having parents or rules and then having the freedom to do whatever she wants. Because a lot of these kids lived in foster homes. And so they didn't have people who cared whether they were out late or not, as crass as that sounds. But one day she went to hang out with one of the kids and their older sibling. And this older sibling told her that if she wanted true freedom, all she had to do was say that her parents abused her and that she didn't want to live with them.
Oh,
Uh,
That's quite the escalation.
yeah,
yeah.
very much so. And so she did that. She went right up to her friend's mom and was like, my parents abused me. And the mom, instead of like talking to her and like talking to the parents or whatever, she just took her to the police. And the next day, the police showed up at her parents' house and informed them that Rena had reported physical abuse, but that no charges would be laid because there was no evidence of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so Rena's parents then requested that like the foster kid ministry send Rena home so that they could like work on the problem. But Rena didn't want to come home, and the ministry was actively encouraging her not to.
Oh,
So was she off at like some social work, some facility while the police investigated the abuse claims?
I think she was just staying with her friend and that friend's mom. I'm not really
Oh, I
sure.
see. Okay.
I think
okay.
the investigation literally took one day. They like went to the house and looked around and talked to her siblings, and they were like,
That doesn't
no,
happen. Yeah.
yeah. And so then they were asked, or her parents were asked by a social worker to sign Rena over to the state, kind of. And if they didn't, then they would get a court order to force them. So they were kind of
Oh,
strong armed into giving Rena to this ministry of children.
that's
Uh,
interesting given like they didn't find evidence of abuse. I'm surprised they would still do that.
yeah, they explained it by saying they would rather take the word of the child than risk sending them home to a dangerous environment,
That is fair.
which is fair, except for how it turns out in this case. Her dad writes in his book, he's like, they did everything right. Everyone did everything right. It just sucks that this was the outcome, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But yeah, so at this time, Rena was put in the care of her maternal grandparents who lived also in Victoria. And she kept telling people that she was being abused by her parents, and everyone believed her, including her grandparents.
Really?
And then she started alleging that she had been sexually abused as a child by her dad when her family traveled to India in 1991.
Oh.
Yeah. And so Rena really had no idea what these allegations meant or the consequences her alleged abuser would have to face because she was only 13 at this time, and she was only like she was just being told what to do by someone she trusted, basically. And so eventually her grandfather became a little bit more uncomfortable about her allegations and I think started to doubt what she was saying. And so he wanted her to go back to live with her parents in the new year. But to prevent that, Rena told the teacher about the abuse, who told the school social worker, who then took Rena to the police again. And then on January 10th, 1997, Manjeet was arrested for abusing his daughter.
Oh wow.
Wow. With like no evidence, just
Yeah. And there was like a bunch of stuff in between that I cut out that kind of led to it, but it was just, yeah, it was crazy. And so he was held in jail for the night. And then the next day he pled not guilty and was released on bail. And so his trial was set for July. And his father-in-law suggested that he plead guilty, quote, so the
Why?
family could be spared the shame of newspaper reports and its outcome, end quote.
Ooh.
That
Ooh.
Which,
I don't like. I would rather prove my innocence than worry about bringing shame to my family while I try to prove my innocence.
exactly, I would much rather be labeled as not a child abuser than potentially labeled a child abuser.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And so Reena was being asked to testify at the trial, and her grandparents were pressuring her to tell the truth because at this point, everyone was kind of like, we don't really believe you, but we're not going to tell you that. We just are going to encourage you to tell the truth.
Mhm.
And this really weighed on her, and she didn't want to testify. So she actually attempted suicide in March of 1997,
Oh,
which, yeah, that's completely, this whole sexual abuse and suicide attempt is left out of the book and the TV show. Or the
that.
sexual abuse is in the TV show, but everything else is left out. And I feel like it's such an integral part of the story
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
because you really get to know her mindset and why she was drawn to these kids.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So she survived and was placed in a facility for a short time being just to kind of make sure that she is healing and, yeah, safe, I guess. And around this time, her grandparents left her alone to go to a wedding in India, even though she had just attempted to kill herself.
That's
Ooh.
not a good. That's not good.
Yeah, it's not great. And so I don't know if that kind of woke her up a little bit and was like, oh, my parents would never have done that to me,
Mm.
but I'm not sure. And so when they returned home, they again pressured her to tell the truth about the sexual abuse. But instead, Reena went to her social worker and told her that she wasn't comfortable living with her grandparents. And so in May 1997, she was placed in a foster home in Langford, BC, which is just right outside of Victoria.
Okay.
And while she was living in this foster home, she was late for curfew one night. And then, when confronted about it, she said she was assaulted on her way home. And
Oh.
no one believed her story and saw that it was just an excuse for getting home past curfew. So the Crown ended up dropping the charges against Manjeet because, quote, due to concerns about the youth's credibility and her history of fabricating events,
Yeah.
end quote. So they were kind of like, she's just using this for her advantage, pretty much.
Yeah.
And then in September 1997, Reena enrolled in yet another new school, and she was having a rough time at foster care because she had to cook and clean and do her own laundry, and no one really cared for her. So this actually led to her going to her parents and saying that she wanted to move back home. She apologized to her dad and said that she didn't do it on purpose, which,
Why did you do it then?
yeah, you didn't really do it on accident.
Yeah.
But
And I
she,
get being coerced or convinced to kind of take this route, but you're still making the active choice to follow
yeah,
through.
Continue with the lies.
Yeah.
yeah, you might not have known of the consequences, but you did choose to say these things.
Yeah.
But she wrote a letter to the police saying that she lied and that her father never abused her. And the police called her to make sure she wasn't being coerced into saying that.
Mm.
And her answers, they had a good conversation and she was allowed to stay, and any record of the charges were wiped from the system.
Mm.
And then in October 1997, her parents noticed even more changes in her as she had started smoking and trying to look tough. She started listening to rap music and wrote Bloods and Crips on her hands and arms and told them that she was part of a gang.
Okay.
That's. Oh,
Okay.
I don't know if you
Um,
can be part of both of those gangs.
yeah, you definitely can't. You definitely can't. They, in the book Under the Bridge, they talk a lot about how all the girls wanted to be like Puff Daddy, who is P. Diddy, who is,
Ugh.
it did
No,
not age
that didn't
well.
age
Did not
well.
age well.
No.
Yeah,
Oh
I was like,
man.
ooh, okay. So anyway, the way she dressed and spoke also changed. She kept asking her parents for money for smokes, but they wouldn't give them to her because she was 14.
That's really fair.
Crazy.
Yeah, so she just went to her aunt, and her aunt was like, yeah, here you go.
Oh.
That's the cool aunt. She knows
right?
she's got a cool aunt.
Yes. And then she also told her aunt that her father tried to tie her to a chair and cut her wrist with a kitchen knife and showed them the
No.
marks on her wrist from her previous suicide attempt, and they believed her.
My God.
Girl, learn from the first time around.
Right?
Did
And
we learn
like,
nothing? Did we learn nothing?
yeah, luckily nothing really happened from that other than it's just crazy. But at the end of October, on the 23rd, she decided that she wanted to go back into the ministry's care. So she walked into Kiwani's emergency youth shelter and stayed there for 3 days. And this is where she met two individuals. I have their initials. I don't know their names because everyone in this case was under the age of 18 and
Uh-uh.
was tried in youth court, pretty much.
Yeah. So the publication bans, we won't get their names.
Yeah. You can search for them. They are out there. They are very easy to find. I will not be saying them.
That's fair.
So she met NC and MGP. And so Rena was impressed by these girls and tried to emulate them so that they would accept and include her. Their relationship was super toxic because NC and MGP were bullies and would only talk to her on a whim and demand things from her that she was only all too eager to give. They like stole her sweatshirt one night that she just got, or would just be like, "We want that. You need to give it to us." And then she just would.
Damn.
Hmm.
They told her that they were part of the Crips and they painted their nails blue. And so Rena did too.
Mm.
And then a couple days later on Halloween, her parents were out shopping with her younger siblings and she invited over some friends and they ended up stealing a bunch of stuff from her parents. But
Oh.
no one really knows if Rena knew that they did that or not.
Mm. It was just they hosted and then all of a sudden there was stuff gone. Yeah.
Yeah, her parents were like, "Hey, where's this?" And she's like, "I don't really know."
Hmm.
But yeah, so social workers weren't able to find a foster home for her, so they suggested she stay with her parents until they can. They had a meeting at the end of October, beginning of November with the social workers, and Rena said to her parents, quote, my parent or said to the social worker, sorry, my parents refused to give me money for smokes. I don't want to live at home and want to be placed in care again, end quote. And that was all it took, so they just put her in a new foster home.
I was going to say, I feel like that wouldn't have worked.
Yeah,
That
right?
shouldn't have worked.
Yeah, at 14, like, oh, my parents won't buy me smokes. It's like, well,
I need a new family.
yeah. It's really heartbreaking how the adults failed in this case.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was really devastating. Rena also had a counselor who would meet her on the beach instead of in her office so they could talk.
That's creepy.
Yeah, it's super odd. I don't know why, but I don't like it. Rena had told her that she had a new boyfriend who was a Crip, and he had given her his jacket, which meant she was also a Crip now. And in her notes, the counselor had written down that Rena was, quote, affiliating herself with the Crips because they were people who had respect, end quote, which is pretty much all Rena was looking for.
Yeah.
She had also given Rena a notebook at an earlier session so that she could write some of her thoughts and feelings down and kind of tell her own story and give her some more power and practice journaling, I feel like. And then it was also around this time when Rena stole NC's notebook slash phone book thing. And she called a bunch of people in it to spread rumors about NC.
Oh.
She was also like telling people her name when she called them. So she'd be
Hmm.
like, hi, don't hang out with NC. She has AIDS. This is also Rena. Bye.
So it's pretty easy to trace who the rumors are starting from. Like she was not
Yeah.
trying to hide that.
No, she was very obviously, very open about it. And I think it was kind of because she heard NC say, like, she beat up this girl or took something from this girl to show alliance or prove respect or something from it. So she was kind of like, oh, if I disrespect you, you will then respect me, kind of thing,
Mm-mm.
which didn't work. And so she had also supposedly started dating MGP's boyfriend while she was out of the province. And so her friendship with MGP is kind of a little bit murky. Some sources say they met in grade 6 and were really good friends until she moved to Alberta to live with her sister. and then MGP moved back November 14th. And then Rena's dad's book says that they didn't meet until November, but
Mm.
I don't really know. Anyway, it got back to NC that Reena had been calling people and talking shit, which she didn't love.
Fair.
Yeah. And so NC's mother actually overheard her on the phone with Kelly one day and heard her say, quote, "We should go in the forest somewhere and dig a big hole in the earth and make it so that it's, deep enough like a grave, and then put things on top of it to cover it up, and then walk with Reena to the forest and have her fall in and then start burying her alive." End quote.
That's so specific for a gossipy phone call.
Yeah, so that was kind of, I think, the
That
gist of it.
that feels like a very long quote to memorize too. You know what I mean? If I overheard that
Fair.
with someone, I'm like,
Yeah.
how do you that's kind of a trail.
Yeah, I will say that that's the quote that I took from the book, which is made up of snippets of the conversation. So there could be some sort of
Right.
like
General
artistic.
gist of it. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
The gist
Hmm.
was they're going in the forest, they're digging a big hole, they're burying her alive.
They're gonna make it look like an accent. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. NC to this day denies ever saying this.
Wild that it was her mom that kind of overheard this and brought this forward. It seems like, at least from
Yeah.
at
Because
Yeah.
this point.
she was like living at this foster home, but then every once in a while she would go kind of bug her mom.
Okay.
And so she would just be like, "Hey, what's up? I need to use the phone." And her mom would be like, okay."
I
Oh.
guess so.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
And so the Wednesday before November 14th, Kelly and NC called another mutual friend to ask her if she wanted to come beat up a girl. To which she responded, "Yeah, sure, why not?"
Oh my gosh.
Great.
Which is not how I'd respond to that, but this girl supposedly didn't think they were being serious because usually when they say that, it never really happens.
Mm-hmm.
On November 14th, 1997, Reena came over to her parents' house to spend the night and spend some time with her siblings. And she was getting ready for a bath when the phone rang, and it was NC who invited Reena to hang out that night. She was reluctant to go because there were rumors that they were planning to, quote, rock her ass, end quote.
Oh,
Okay.
NC then put MGP on the line, who convinced her to come out. Her parents tried to get her to stay in, but she didn't really care and went out anyways, telling her family she'd be back by 10. And in her father's book, he wrote, quote, "I feared that any firmness on my part now would be mistaken for force and abuse," end quote, which is,
That's unfortunate.
that is
yeah, very
sad.
unfortunate. And this night was destined to be a disaster because not only was there a full moon, but also a Russian rocket exploded and lit up the sky with falling debris that was on fire.
Wow.
Yeah. So that kind of sets the mood. So Reena, NC, and MGP met at the Walmart and headed to the field behind Shoreline School, where a large party of teens were just hanging out, partying. At roughly 9:25 p.m., someone threw a rock through the school window, prompting the janitor to call the police. The police arrived around 9:45 p.m. Shortly before the police arrived, another girl walked into the party and announced that she was there to fight a girl. Reena then took off running, knowing that they meant her. And so she ran down the street to the phone booth outside the Max convenience store on the southeast side of the Craig Flower Bridge and called her family to tell them that she would be home soon. And it was about 9:45, 10 p.m. at that time.
Hmm.
The girls who chased her had surrounded the phone booth that she was in and were trying to convince her that they weren't going to beat her up. And when Reena finally exited the phone booth, NC and MGP grabbed her and locked arms with her so she couldn't get away. Reena kept saying that she was going to catch the bus and go home, but they took her bus pass and ripped it up so that she couldn't. The group then moved underneath the south end of the Craig Flower Bridge along with some other kids from the party. And there were about 16 kids in total, 14 girls and 2 boys. And there was a wooden stairwell leading under the bridge with a railing and hardly enough room for the 16 kids. And these stairs kind of led down one side, and there was like, I think, a little walkway or something across to the other side and then stairs also on the other side. So you could go down one side and out the other. MB, who was a close friend of Warren's and was dating his good friend LL, heard NC yell, "Why are you trying to ruin my life?" at Reena. There was a bunch of yelling and accusations being thrown at Reena, and then NC put out her cigarette on Reena's forehead. It
Hmm.
just tells me that so many kids were smoking at this time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
remembering that they're like 14 to 16 throughout this all is baffling to me. And all
Mhm.
It's very wild. So Reena struck out when this happened, and Kelly rushed forward and punched Reena. And then half of the girls started to swarm Reena while the other half ran up to the parking lot at the top of the hill. And so a semicircle had kind of formed around Reena, surrounding her on the stairs. And she kept trying to run and get past them, but they wouldn't let her leave. They had her trapped against the railing as they beat her up, so she couldn't get away.
jeez.
At this time, LL saw Warren run to the group and kick Reena in the head at least once. Mind you,
Good lord.
Kelly and Warren, the main perpetrators of this case, which is why I know their names, didn't know Reena. They'd never met her.
Hmm.
Really?
Yeah,
They're just in
she
it.
was,
They're just in it to beat someone up.
yeah, pretty much.
Wow. Good
So,
people.
yeah, after he kicked Reena in the head, LL ran after him and tried to pull him away. It took some convincing, but he was able to drag him up the embankment. One of the girls, G.O., kicked out Reena's feet and she fell to the muddy ground after sliding off the stairs. She was pleading with them to stop and telling them that she was sorry. Eventually, one girl yelled, "Next person to touch her gets a shot from me." And everyone listened because she was apparently very scary. And so now sources kind of differ. They either let Reena walk up the stairs and away from them, or they walked up the stairs first and Reena appeared a little while later. Either way, they all saw Reena come up from under the bridge and start walking north across it. MB described her saying that, quote, "Reena was staggering a little. She looked lightheaded and she looked a little dazed," end quote.
I mean, if you're getting beaten up, I feel like that would be valid.
Yeah,
Yeah, I would
yeah,
say.
Right?
I agree. Yeah, definitely not
Not
very
that
stable.
surprising. Yeah.
Yeah. At some point during the fight, someone had grabbed Rena's backpack and they started going through it after and throwing the contents into the water. And they found Rena's journal that had been given to her by her counselor. And they started like ripping pages out and throwing them in the water. I
Yeah.
kind of think they were looking for NC's like notebook that she stole,
Oh, yeah.
Hmm.
but I don't know. They also smashed her Ralph Lauren Polo Sport perfume bottle, which was
Tragic.
a big deal.
Tragic.
Yeah, there was, yeah. Anyway, no one called the police. They kind of just like hung out at the top, just kind of shooting the shit, like, whoa, that's crazy. Why'd that happen? A
Damn.
bunch of their parents, or a bunch of them called their parents for rides and were waiting for them at the parking lot at the top of the hill. NC and MGP had left and gone home, and they had signed into their foster group home by 11:03 p.m. So they had left kind of right after the fight. Kelly walked up to Warren and said something along the lines of, "Let's go and see what's happening," or "Let's go and see why this happened," or "Let's go check on her," or "Let's go make sure she doesn't call the police," or whatever. So at roughly 10:40 p.m., Warren and Kelly followed Reena across the bridge to check on her and kind of see what happened or make sure she doesn't call the police. No one really knows why they went over after her. When they reached the other side of the bridge, they grabbed Reena and brought her underneath the bridge on that side. Kelly told her to take off her jacket and shoes for some reason, and then they continued to beat her up. And this beating was so much more savage than the first. Reena was punched, stomped on, throat chopped, and eventually knocked unconscious. They dragged her into the water, during which both her pants and her underwear came off due to the way they were dragging her,
Oh.
which I don't know how that works because they say they drug her by her feet,
Yeah,
but
if they drug her by her feet, it doesn't seem like that it would work that way.
Exactly. And it's kind of wild that both her pants and her underwear came off. But when they found the pants, they were like zipped up and the button was still done up. So they hadn't been like taken off.
Hmm.
But allegedly, at this point, before she was fully in the water, Warren saw a military police car drive over the bridge. So he stopped helping Kelly bring Rita into the water. And then Kelly either smoked an entire cigarette while standing on her head or just held her head under the water until she stopped struggling.
Oh, standing on Rena's head. I was
Yes, sorry.
like, are you doing a headstand and just ripping a cigarette? Okay.
Yeah,
It
yeah,
sounds like they chain smoke. Like it sounds like they just haven't stopped.
yeah. No, they really haven't.
I mean, I
Yeah,
know that
so
shouldn't be the biggest of my concerns right now.
yeah, so yeah, Rena was dead now. They kind of left her to the tide and went on their way. Some sources say that they kind of stood there and watched her a bit, but timeline wise, they couldn't have stood there for very long. Geo and another friend saw them walking south across the bridge around 11:10 p.m. when they were driving north across on their way home. Geo said that she waved at them, but they didn't see her, and the friend she was riding with didn't recognize them. There's some sort of like inconsistencies with that story. I'm not really clear on whether or not they did recognize them or they didn't. But either way, they saw two people walking south on the bridge at that time. On their way up from under the bridge before they started crossing it, they ran into a friend of Kelly's who asked her if she, quote, pissed her pants because she looked wet up to her waist, which was kind of just giving evidence to her standing waist deep in the water. Not far from the bridge on the other side, she ran into another friend who she asked for a cigarette because she was stressed out. And he asked her why she was stressed out. And she replied something along the lines of that she had gotten a fight with a girl and then held her head underwater. He described to the police that she looked a little wet, but she wasn't shivering. And he told his father about this conversation when he got home, but they didn't go to the police with it until Rena's body was found.
Ooh.
Hey.
Yeah. When she got home, she showered, changed into PJs, and went out into the backyard to talk to her stepmom, who was in the hot tub with a friend, before just going to bed.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah. Warren had arrived at his buddy's house around 11:15 p.m. He told them that he and Kelly got into a fight with a native guy to explain his appearance. He also called his girlfriend Cyrita around 11:30 p.m., but they didn't talk too long because she was asleep.
Hmm.
So, in the days after the murder, the timeline gets a little bit iffy. So, bear with me. On Saturday, November 15th, the day after she was killed, a man found an Adidas jacket and a pair of black platform shoes strewn about in Gorge Park. He picked them up and placed them by the fence, hanging the jacket on a fence post for the owner to find. Someone driving by saw the jacket and thought it belonged to her grandson, so she picked it up, brought it home, and washed it. Um,
Damn. There goes some more
yeah.
evidence.
Right? Because she's like, "Oh, there's blood on this. Like, I should clean that up for my grandson." Um,
Damn.
and so when the police eventually collected it, it had already been washed, so it really wasn't useful evidence. That same day, Kelly had also sent NC and MGP to get Rena's shoes and jacket and dispose of them. However, only her shoes were there, so they took them and rode the bus downtown and threw the shoes in just a random dumpster. So I don't know that they were ever found. Warren went over to Cyrita's house with LL and MB to wash his clothes. One of Cyrita's friends who had witnessed the fight had called her that morning and told her that Warren had kicked a girl in the head. So that was the first question she asked him when she saw him. And he said he shouldn't have done it and he wasn't really sure why he did. Sarita then took Warren's laundry downstairs, and when she was putting his clothes in the washer, she noticed his pants were dirty and that there was a couple drops of blood on them. Some sources say they were about the size of a quarter. Other sources say they were about the size of a loonie.
$1 coin for non-Canadian folks out there.
Yes. She didn't think too much about it because he had told her that he got into a fight with a native guy during their short phone call last night. So she just went about washing them. She poured bleach in the washer because Warren was obsessed with keeping his clothes as white as possible.
That seems like a
He
really convenient excuse for why they bleached his clothing.
right? Yeah. But yeah, he was part of the Crips. He wore all white. He's giving like early Eminem vibes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. At Rena's house, her parents were freaking out because she had never come home. They called her grandparents and her friends to see if she had stayed with them. And these friends include both NC and MGP. And they were like, no, we haven't seen her since last night. Like, that's crazy. Suman phoned the Saanich police to report her daughter missing, but was told that because of her history, a search wouldn't happen until Monday.
Damn.
Really
That's
is
just
like a boy who cried wolf situation, which is so unfortunate.
yeah.
Yeah, I
It's just
agree.
another reason not to be a pathological liar. Because if
Exactly.
something really happens, people aren't going to believe you.
Yeah.
Exactly. Also, throughout the days after Rena went missing, NC and Kelly kept looking in the newspapers to see if anything had been posted about Rena. And when they couldn't find anything, NC asked Kelly, "Where's Rena?" And Kelly replied, quote, "I don't know, she's probably floating around somewhere," end quote.
Eesh.
Oh,
That's not a good
yikes.
response.
Yeah. And NC was kind of like, okay, that's a weird answer, but she didn't know that Kelly and Warren had killed her at this point. She just thought that Rena had disappeared after being beat up.
Ew.
Later that week, Cyrita walked up to Warren having a secretive conversation with Kelly and NC, which she thought was odd because he wasn't friends with them. And when Warren noticed her approaching, he turned to Kelly, who was talking, and told her to shush. To which Cyrita replied, quote, "There's nothing you can say to Warren that you can't say to me," end quote. Kelly said, "Oh, I think there is," which caused Cyrita to ask Warren, "Why are you keeping stuff from me?" before she quickly turned and left. Warren followed her and they walked back to where he was staying so that he could change before coming over to her house for supper. And this following conversation turned into a huge moment in the case slash trial, but no one really knows how it actually went. We kind of just know the gist of it. So once Warren had finished changing, he asked Cyrita if she really wanted to know what they were talking about. And she said, "If you don't want to tell me, then I don't want to know, like whatever." And so they went back and forth a little bit like that before he admitted that what he told her about the fight with the native guy wasn't true. He then asked her, quote, "Haven't you wondered why that Rena girl hasn't been around?" End quote. And she responded, "Well, she got beat up, so she probably doesn't want to be around." And then he said, "No, I mean, hasn't been around anywhere."
Yeesh.
And so she's kind of like, "I didn't know that. We don't go to school with her. We've never met her before."
Is this
Um,
all a verbal conversation or is this like in writing somewhere?
no, this is a verbal conversation.
Okay.
Um, and so there was a song playing in the background that said something about 187, which apparently is code for murder.
Oh.
And so Warren just kind of goes, "Exactly that."
Hmm.
Ew.
And
Okay.
it's the whole conversation is very unknown. Pretty much all we know kind of for certain is that there was a song playing, it said 187, he was like, "That's what happened," and that's
Hmm.
pretty much it. Cyrita lied a lot during the trial because she didn't want to implicate Warren too much. She told the police, "He didn't give me much detail. He said that they went back down there and Kelly was kicking her and stomping on her head, and then she held her head under the water for 5 minutes, and then they dragged her in the water. He said when they dragged her in the water, her pants came off because they were dragging her," end quote. So that's he kind of admitted to her everything that happened that night,
Hmm.
but she was sketchy in admitting it.
Hmm.
She also didn't really want to believe it. So that's why she never really came forward. She was incredibly loyal to Warren, like, unfortunately so.
I still can't
Um,
get over the fact that these are like 14, 15-year-olds. Like, that just adds such a complex layer to this.
right? Yeah. Yeah. Taking into account that no one's frontal lobe is developed.
Nowhere close.
Yeah. It makes for a really annoying case to research. Suman called the police a few more times throughout the week to make sure they were taking her daughter's disappearance seriously. And then on Wednesday, November 19th, Kelly was walking home with her friend CN when she confessed to killing Reena. She also supposedly took her to the two sites and showed her what happened.
Oh.
I don't know what CN did with that, but it doesn't sound like much.
Yeah, I feel like she should have went to the cops with that. Be like, hey, I just got like a whole confession out of someone.
Yeah. Kelly, like this whole week, has been admitting to pretty much anyone who would listen that she killed Reena after beating her up and breaking her arms and legs,
Damn.
which, yeah.
That's
Um,
bold. I can't imagine just going around and flaunting that at all.
Right.
right? Because they're listening. This is another complex layer of this case is they're listening to this rap music that's really idolizing murder and like making it cool and exciting. And they're like, yeah, if I want to be cool and exciting, I need to kill someone kind of thing.
Yeah.
So
I
they're like
also
talking about it like it's something to be proud about and not that they took life away from someone.
I also wonder, like, the added layer to it too, like with this whole thing with Rena kind of trying to be tougher than she is. It's like, do these people just see Kelly and the others trying to act tougher than they are and not believing actually a thing that they say, when in
Yeah.
Yeah.
reality, no, she's actually killed someone.
Yeah, I
Mhm.
think that's like 100% it.
Yeah. Because like I feel
Um,
like if I was in middle to high school and like the two girls that I know are known for trying to like be bad
Hmm.
and they started saying, "Oh, guess who I killed?" Like I don't know if I'd believe them at first.
yeah.
Yeah, it'll
I'd
You'd
be
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 like,
like
like,
"Oh
a
yeah,
oh,
ooh
sure
ha
you
ha
wow.
he
did."
he. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, yeah, okay.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, so she was just bragging about killing Rena. And then on Thursday, November 20th, early in the morning, a constable came to the group home to talk to NC and MGP about Rena. And so this constable talked to MGP first, who told her that they met Rena at the Walmart. Rena didn't want to party with them, so she left with some guys. And that was the last time they saw her. And then the constable allowed MGP to go and pretty much talk to NC, like to get her to bring her down. So MGP told NC exactly what she already told the cops. So NC just told her exactly the same thing.
That was
So that
shitty
their
police
stories
work.
aligned. Yeah. I was like, I maybe wouldn't let them out of my sight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's just me. So NC was hanging out with Kelly later that day and told her that the cops had come to the group home and they started freaking out about being caught. So they decided that if the heat really comes down, they'll just move to Mexico. And they were like super excited about like moving to Mexico.
That is so easy when you're 15.
Right?
No income, no worry about it, how you're surviving. Yeah.
Yeah. And then Friday, November 21st, there was supposedly these two Russian sisters who lived at the group home and who NC confessed everything that she did to them and took them to show them where it all went down. Because NC was also kind of like saying that she killed Rena as well, but to different people, even though she didn't know that Rena was already dead.
Hmm.
And so these girls talked to the police about everything that NC had told them. They called the Saanich police, learned that Rena was indeed a missing person, and then started investigating it as a possible homicide instead of a missing person. I don't know if this is true. I don't know if
Hmm.
these girls ever existed because it seems very convenient. But the Russian sisters talked NC into taking them under the bridge, telling them about what all went down, which NC was super happy to do. They then went straight to the police after and told them exactly what she told them. And they asked the police why they hadn't searched the water yet, like they had told them to do earlier this week when NC had first started bragging about killing someone. And the police kind of said they didn't really know that this happened. But either way, the officers did end up taking this case a little bit more seriously and investigating it. And they were discussing the people involved according to the Russian girls. And one of the officers actually knew Kelly and one of the other girls involved. And so they decided to approach the other girl because this officer said that, quote, Kelly's the type who will just tell you to fuck off. end quote. So they'd have better luck with this other girl.
Hmm.
And then as it turned out, 4 of the girls, including Kelly, were at this girl's house. But for some reason, the police only took 2 of the girls in for questioning, neither of which were Kelly.
Why not just take them all?
Okay. Maybe it
Yeah,
was like a age custody thing, like parents present. Maybe?
maybe the
B.
parent who was present was kind of like, yeah, take Kelly, she sucks. And the police were like,
Oh.
sorry, we can't. Like, yeah. So one of these girls that they took in told them everything she knew, which included the fight under the south end of the bridge and being driven home by Gio's mom and seeing 2 people on the bridge walking back to the south side just after 11 p.m. She supposedly gave the officer the 8 names of the people involved because there was 8 people who beat up Reena at the south side of the bridge, and then 2 of those 8, Kelly and Warren, went to the north side of the bridge and finished her off.
Mm-hmm.
So that night, this is Friday, November 21st, the police went to Shoreline School again, where a bunch of the kids were hanging out partying, and they arrested them and brought them all in for questioning. And when NC was arrested or brought in for questioning, she was like, "Get me John Gotti's lawyer." And John Gotti was a mobster in New York, and she idolized him.
Oh my god.
And they were
Hopefully
like, yeah,
she
he's
can pay those
busy.
fees. Yeah, I was gonna say.
Yeah. They were like, we will not be doing that. You will be getting one by the state, pretty much.
You're getting a public attorney. Thank you
Yeah,
very much.
exactly. And so this part's kind of interesting. When Warren was talking to the police after being brought in for questioning, he declines a lawyer at first, then goes on to confess and tell them what happened. He does lie a lot. Everyone lies. It drives me crazy. And then later, they're like, do you want to speak to a lawyer? And he's like, well, it's too late now. And I would like to know if he knew that it actually wasn't too late and they have to get you a lawyer whenever you ask, because they threw out an entire chunk of Kelly's initial interview that night because the judge was convinced that she didn't know her rights at the time. And I'd like to
Oh.
argue that that can be said for this situation as well.
Oh, so they threw out a piece of Warren's interview as well? Or like he
They
just
threw
didn't
out
know
of,
his rights?
I don't think he knew his rights, but they kept it all, even though they got Kelly's lawyers got them to throw out her entire interview that night because they feel that her rights weren't properly explained to her.
Right.
Ah.
So
But
it happens when your
Warren's,
frontal lobe is not fully developed.
yeah, and she's a
Were they
very,
intoxicated at the time? Because I know they
oh
were
yeah,
at
they were on
okay.
drugs and drinking and like whatever the fuck. But
Okay.
I think he got a much harsher treatment than she
Yeah.
did.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's because her family, like she has a family and they can pay for good lawyers.
Mm-hmm.
And Warren was kind of stuck with public defense attorneys.
Yeah.
But it still kind of, it really bothered me that she got her entire interview thrown out that night and he didn't, even though he obviously didn't understand to the same extent.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, November 22nd at 11:15 a.m., after an hour of searching the cold water of the gorge, the dive unit found her white Fruit of the Loom underwear amongst the eelgrass. Almost 15 minutes later, they found her blue jeans, and then an hour later at 12:22, they got a call over the walkie-talkies that something was found. And so they left where they were searching to drive to 2814 Murray Drive, where they found Reena's body. Around 5 this evening, the police visited her parents and asked for a picture of Reena. They returned at 2 a.m. to tell them that Reena was dead. On Sunday, November 23rd, Suman, Reena's mom, went to the hospital to identify Reena's body. On Monday, November 24th, Dr. Laurel Gray performed the autopsy in the presence of 4 Saanich police officers. Reena weighed 182 pounds and measured 5'6" at this time. Her body was intact, but the skin on her hands and feet was starting to slip, estimating that she had been in the water for about a week, which lines up with their timeline. The autopsy showed that there were bruising and swelling under both of her eyes. She had very bruised cheeks. There was a large laceration on her lips. Her nose was bruised and there was bloody discharge in her nostrils. There were red marks on tops of both of her shoulders. There was kind of an odd symmetry to this bruising on her shoulders, almost like a circle. There was bruising on her collarbone. There was a thermal burn, which is just a circular red mark above her right eyebrow, confirming that NC did put out her cigarette
Oh,
on her forehead.
yeah.
Mm.
On the left side of the back of her head, there was a mark that was textured in a manner consistent with a sneaker.
Wow.
There was also a pattern of footwear on the left side of her back. There was a large bruise on the left side of her voice box, consistent with a karate chop type blow. Her teeth were clenched so hard and her tongue was kind of clenched in between them. There were no broken bones or fractures, contrary to Kelly claiming that they broke her legs and her arms all week. There was no obvious signs of sexual trauma or genital trauma. There was no damage to the liver, or there was damage, sorry, to the liver and the pancreas. Her bowel was crushed, consistent with a car crash victim. So they had
Ooh,
hit her so hard that it caused a crush convulsion injury that most people who are in car crashes get.
wow.
There was evidence of internal bleeding in the chest and lower abdomen, and there was severe bruising on her scalp. Her brain was swollen, indicating a sufficient concussive injury that resulted in unconsciousness. And the coroner said that it is unlikely that she would have survived the head injuries had she not been drowned.
Wow.
The internal exam of lungs indicated a white frothy substance, which is consistent with death by drowning. Dr. Gray also found 18 small pebbles in her lungs.
Wow.
There were no drag marks on her body, even though her shirt was positioned in a manner consistent with having been dragged by her legs. However, the coroner and the judge were like, the shirt moving was most likely caused by the tide and being in somewhere with waves for a week, since her pants were found with the button and fly done up, indicating that they had not been taken off, but more likely came off while being dragged. But no one will admit to dragging her in a way that makes sense for them to come off. Investigators also found Rena's diary under the bridge, and shockingly, nothing came out of it, even though it was readable. They like dried it off, and I think it's sitting in a forensic lab somewhere.
Hmm.
But it was never used as evidence, which I guess why
Maybe
would it?
because of
But
the past experiences and just like what she's been saying and accusing folks of. It's like, is this fact or fiction, these writings?
yeah, I would really like to read it just to know what she was writing. Like,
Yeah.
was it fact? Was it fiction? Was she like feeling remorse over her past actions? Was she writing about why she wanted to be accepted so much into the crypts of Victoria, BC? But yeah, there was there was quite a few memorials held for her, but the one held by her school, according to her counselor, didn't do her justice. And her counselor said, quote, "For no one spoke of Reena as she had known her, and she wished she could have stood up there, told the strangers of a young girl who was so young, who didn't know the ways of the world, yet she was emerging, as if she no longer wanted to melt into the walls behind her, as if she was ready to be." The counselor would have said Reena was determined. She was not awkward or shy, not anymore. True, she didn't belong anywhere, not really. She didn't belong in the traditional world of her grandparents or in the modern world of thugs and contrived sexiness. She didn't belong with the strict and severe JWs because she was 14 and wanted birthday parties and rebellion, and she wanted to celebrate. But she was trying to be a girl who would belong somewhere. Reena told stories in the last year of her life that were surely untrue, invented tales of mayhem and lovers, boastful braggings that earned that most elusive quality, something they all called respect. End quote. So it just kind of explains who she was,
Mhm.
but these funerals didn't show who she was at all. And kind of adding to that, most sources had nothing nice to say about her. They None of their descriptions were very kind. They didn't like, you didn't get this picture of a 14-year-old girl just trying to fit in
That's so
until,
sad.
yeah, it was very sad. So now getting into the trials. The Shoreline 6 trial, as they were kind of monikered, in February 9th, 1998, the Shoreline 6 trials began. So, this is the trial of the 6 girls who took part in the initial attack. And so they were prosecuted in a youth court with their identities protected, like I had already mentioned. The Crown changed the charge from aggravated assault to assault causing bodily harm after reviewing the evidence. 3 of them pled guilty to assault causing bodily harm, including NC and MGP, while 3 others pleaded not guilty but were charged with the same offense after 3 days of trial.
Hmm.
They received sentences ranging from 60 days conditional custody to 1 year in prison.
Jesus, the youth criminal justice system really, really not amazing.
Yeah, and I try because they were only charged with beating her up, not
Okay.
Right.
killing
Not
her,
them. Yeah.
which I kept having to remind myself because I
Mm-hmm.
would get angry. I was like, really? 60 days? She died. And
Yeah.
I was like,
I needed
they
that reminder too.
didn't kill her. Yeah. And according to the TV show, NC escaped twice from prison. I think that was
Was
added
that just,
dramatic
yeah.
effect.
I was
Yeah.
going to say that may be dramatic effect.
Yeah, I don't really believe that. Kelly Ellard and Warren Glowatsky were charged with Reena's murder and were tried in adult court due to the extreme nature of the crime, even though they were teenagers at the time. Warren Glowatsky was charged with second-degree murder and aggravated assault, resulting in the death of Reena Virk. His trial began in April 1999. His girlfriend, Cyrita, was their most important witness, and her story was heavily questioned because it kind of kept changing. She was still very loyal to her boyfriend, and the judge wrote, quote, during her evidence in chief, SH was at best reluctant and at times almost indifferent. In cross-examination, she spoke up confidently and often displayed an eagerness and willingness to agree without taking any opportunity to consider her response. She effectively recanted the significant aspects of her earlier statement. She was a bold liar at trial, but not a sophisticated or clever one. I will also take into account her demeanor as well as her relationship with Glowatsky, including her current feelings for him, in reaching my conclusion that she lied to protect Glowatsky whenever she thought she could get away with it. End quote.
Was she charged with perjury?
Nope.
Damn.
Yeah, no
Okay.
one was.
I feel
And
like
Okay.
everyone
I, f-
lied.
I feel like so many people commit perjury on the stands, and like we very rarely hear of anyone actually getting charged with it.
Yeah, it was so shocking to me to learn how many people perjured themselves and how little was done about it and how they weren't scared to lie. Like they went in prepared to lie.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd be scared.
Yeah, right?
I'd be
Yeah.
scared to get on the stand and tell the truth.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just wild. So, continuing with that kind of theme, Warren was only charged in front of a judge, not a jury, and he also took the stand and lied. Quote, on the whole, Glowatsky's evidence was conveniently incomplete and improbable. I did not believe him, nor do I have a reasonable doubt about the truth of his evidence, end quote. And then a bunch of other witnesses lied as well. So, of researching this, I had to question the book and the court documents because everything in them was a lie. And that was very frustrating.
Yeah, the court documents are supposed to be what you can trust.
Yeah. And a lot of them were voir dire where the
Ah.
judge was determining what could be admissible,
Mm-hmm.
but it was still including stuff that he would then cut out. And I was like, okay, well, now I've read that.
Now
And
it's in my brain.
yeah. Either way, on June 2nd, 1999, the judge said, quote, on the whole of the evidence, I am satisfied beyond a reasonable doubt that Glowatsky acted as a co-principal in the second-degree murder of Reena Virk. I conclude that he actively participated in the further beating at the north end of the bridge and then helped drag Virk while she was unconscious to the water where Ellard probably drowned her. I am satisfied beyond a reasonable doubt that Glowatsky intended to cause Virk bodily harm of a kind that he knew was likely to result in her death, and also that by then dragging and abandoning her at or near the water, he was reckless as to whether death ensued. At the very least, he intended to and actively aided Ellard both in the beating and dragging with the intent that he or Ellard caused bodily harm to Virk of a kind that he knew was likely to result in her death with reckless disregard. I find Warren Glowatsky guilty of second-degree murder as charged, end quote. He was
That's
sentenced
good.
to, his judge felt very reasonable. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole until November 21st, 2004, which is only 5 years later. But one of the sources I read said that the minimum they could charge them with was 5 years until parole, and the maximum was 7 years until parole because of their ages, I think.
Oh, okay.
I didn't really understand that much, and then I couldn't find it again after I had read it, so I couldn't go back and double check once I realized that was actually very important. His lawyers appealed his case, but they lost the appeal in 2001. Kelly's first trial was held before a jury in Vancouver. Warren was subpoenaed to testify, but he refused because he was scared to be considered a rat and have his life made difficult in prison. And so, yeah.
I feel like that's not how subpoenas work, though. You get subpoenaed, you
Yeah.
gotta go.
Yeah, aren't they legally mandatory?
Like,
Yes.
you can't just be like, not gonna do that. Thanks, though.
You can do that, but you will get charged with contempt, which he did.
Okay,
And
okay,
time was
okay.
added to his sentence. Yeah. So you
Okay.
are right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Kelly pleaded innocent on March 18th, 2000, which is the day Nicole was born.
Good day. It's a good, I mean, it's having a good day,
Yeah.
I guess.
I was like, wild. Love that. 30 witnesses were called to testify against her. 15 of them were teenagers. And these were most of the people who she was like, yeah, I killed her. And so that really didn't work well in her favor.
Didn't pan well. Didn't pan out
Yeah.
well.
And unfortunately, the defense did an amazing job discrediting almost all of them.
Eesh.
After Kelly's lawyers were done with them, they also seemed to have drug problems, anger problems, problems with rules, with sex, with heroin, with honesty, and most of all, problems with Kelly.
Every single one of them?
My
Every one of
Yeah.
them? Like,
Which
man.
is, it's so aggravating.
Yeah.
However, Kelly Ellard was convicted on March 31st, 2000 of second-degree murder of Reena Virk. On April 20th, 2000, she was sentenced to parole after 5 years, or life in prison with parole after 5 years. And the judge said, quote, Kelly, you are a young, intelligent, and you have a wonderful family. They believe in you. And I can only say that you must never let them down. And more importantly, you must never let yourself down again. I think you owe it to Reena Virk to live a life that is exemplary. And now you owe that to yourself. I hope you do well. End quote.
No. No.
Yep.
Not it.
You owe
What
it
the
to
fuck?
Reena
Yeah.
Virk?
Yeah, no.
What?
No. I think
Yeah.
she owes
Why
Rita
are-
life in prison for that.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
I agree. I agree. It makes me furious to read that. It also is very similar to Ted Bundy's case where they were like, you're a promising young man.
You're handsome. You're gonna do good things.
Exactly. And she was a pretty little white
No.
girl, destined to do great things.
Destined.
Her case was almost immediately appealed because they felt that Kelly was asked inappropriate questions during cross-examination, and the appeal was set for March 12, 2002. She was let out on bail until that time, and the conditions made it so that she was pretty much just under house arrest, but I think she was living in Vancouver at that time.
Mm.
And on the day of her appeal in court, new evidence came to light, and they adjourned the case to investigate this new evidence,
Oh.
which was that one of the people who testified to her participation in the killing admitted to being untruthful.
Wasn't that already determined, though? Wasn't that
Yeah,
already
right?
like, people already knew. You're not
Yeah.
trustworthy.
And I don't know who that person was. I couldn't find it.
Man.
So in February 2003, the BC Court of Appeal ordered a new trial for her. While waiting for her new trial, she assaulted a 58-year-old woman in a park, and she was rearrested and her bail was revoked, so she was once again locked up.
See, that could have been avoided if they just kept her in prison.
Right?
Mm.
Yeah. So Kelly's second trial started on June 14th, 2004, also in Vancouver. They had it moved to Vancouver because too many people in Victoria knew about it, so they couldn't have like an unbiased jury.
Fair.
During this trial, she was uncooperative, angry, and rude. She also tried out a lot of new accents while testifying, which is super fucking weird. I can't remember if it was at this trial or her third trial, but I remember
Spoiler.
reading in yeah, sorry. um she was like, yeah, she said this, switching back into her British accent, or she said this, starting in this accent. And I was like,
I can't imagine just busting out a British accent on
right?
the stand and being tried for second-degree murder.
Yeah. And so they
Oh,
were questioning
man.
her, and then it came to like they had a recess, and she came back and she's like, all she would say is, I didn't kill Reena Virk. I didn't do it. I wasn't there. That was all she would say, except she would say it in different accents.
Oh, my.
And so she's
My
just
God.
making a joke out of this. And I
Yeah.
don't know how people didn't see that.
They must have, though. They had to have. It's just like, what can you do at that point? Can you kick her out for that? Can you?
Yeah. Like take her off the stand. Like she's not being a cooperative witness
Yeah.
or whatever. Anyway, Warren did decide to testify at this trial. He decided that it was worth being considered a rat or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
All of the witnesses were also adults now. And so their frontal lobes were more developed. They were actually telling the truth and taking full responsibility for their actions. They weren't trying to hide it and have this weird loyalty towards Kelly and Warren. So it was like kind of a blessing in disguise, but also not really.
Mm-hmm.
However, unfortunately, on July 18th, 2004, the judge announced a mistrial as a result of a hung jury after 5 days of deliberating because one person did not think that Kelly did it.
Oh my God. In no, like, there's no world that I think she didn't do it.
Right?
Even if she
It's
didn't specifically do that, she's still
she's
being an absolute ass on trial. It's like, just get rid
right.
of her.
And she got rearrested for assaulting someone else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like during the trial. Yeah, anyway. So Kelly's trial number 3 began on February 21st, 2005. The Crown's case rested on incriminating statements allegedly made by Miss Eller to a number of persons. 11 people gave statements at this trial, and all were teens in 1997. They also reused some testimonies from previous trials, but a lot of the evidence that was used in case or in trial number 2 was not reused in trial number 3, which
Really?
I find it very odd. The case also rested on observations of Miss Ellard and Mr. Gluwatsky following Miss Virk to the north end of the bridge and returning later to the south end. Mr. Gluwatsky also gave a testimony. They just included a Vetrovic warning, kind of saying, like, he's been known to lie, so don't convict only on his testimony, have other evidence.
Yeah.
Their main piece of physical evidence was her
Yeah.
jacket with salt residue on the sleeves.
I was gonna say we haven't heard much of that physical evidence yet in this case.
Because there was none. They washed it all. And like,
You would think, or you would hope that there would still be evidence left, though. Like
right?
washing a pair of pants in in your normal standard wash. What's that really gonna do, though? If that's the case, why is everyone not getting rid of evidence that way?
Yeah. Yeah. So like the only physical evidence that I came across actually being used was that she wore this jacket with salt residue on the sleeves. And she was just like, it's my sister's.
So did they manage? Like, where's the salt coming from, though? Because is it not a freshwater river?
No, sorry. It's a waterway coming in from the Pacific Ocean.
Oh.
Oh, that
So
makes
it was
sense.
kind of
Oh.
proving that her arms were under the water long
Interesting.
enough to get salt residue on her fancy Calvin Klein jacket.
And were they like, how do they? I don't know if you know this. Is just me speaking out loud. But like, how were they able to? Did they match the salt to the water in the waterway, or was it just like, oh, it's salt water. There's salt water there. That's enough for us.
That the second one is pretty much my assumption because they
Okay.
didn't talk about actually matching it to the gorge waterway. Or
So
even
no,
like the pebbles, like matching it to
where
the
in the
pebbles.
water? Yeah.
Yeah, which I thought they would have. And maybe they did. And the author of the book was like, that's not important. I just won't include it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It made
Maybe
me
it's just
really
not
mad.
juicy enough for the books.
I
Yeah.
guess. It just,
But you would
it's,
think that if they did, it would be in, sorry to interrupt, it would be in the
yeah,
trial documents, which we don't
exactly.
see because you've read
Yeah.
those. Yeah.
Yeah. It was just really frustrating that the only real evidence was
A bit
witness
of salt.
testimony.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then
We know
there
that's
was
not.
no physical evidence. Yeah.
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 Yikes. Sorry.
The judge at this trial said, quote, far from feeling remorse for this senseless murder, it is apparent from the evidence that over the course of the next weeks, you continuously bragged of your crime to your extended circle of friends. You seemed proud of your actions. Indeed, you grossly exaggerated the injuries which you claim to have inflicted on Miss Virk in an effort, I find, to feed your misguided desire for attention and reputation.
True.
That
So,
was a much better
Yep.
yes.
address to her than the
Yeah.
other judge.
This judge had his head screwed on straight, more or less. I was a little mad with some of the evidence that he didn't include or they didn't include. I don't remember if it was a girl or a boy, but what they said when they sentencing her kind of made up for it.
Mm-hmm.
So on April 12th, 2005, she was found guilty of second-degree murder by all 12 jurors. The
Good.
judge noted that she had not taken responsibility for her actions, showed no remorse, and demonstrated traits of a psychopath, which, say it louder for the people in the back. July 7th, 2005, during her sentencing trial, the judge also said to her, quote, no, Miss Ellard, you alone are responsible for your situation, and until you reach this elementary conclusion, you will not grow. You will not rehabilitate. You will be forever stalled in this nightmare which you have created. Miss Ellard, for this crime, in light of its aggravating circumstances and stressing the need for denunciation and deterrence, I sentence you to life imprisonment. And I set the period of imprisonment which you must serve before eligibility for parole at 7 years. End quote.
Wow.
So, yeah, kind of called her out a little bit.
Yeah.
Her lawyers appealed this conviction again and won her a fourth trial in 2008. However, the Supreme Court of Canada upheld the third conviction, so it never happened. Thank
That's
God.
good. Yeah.
This appeal was based on the defense feeling that the judge didn't instruct the jury properly when they went to go deliberate, I guess. It's also kind of wild that had she just taken her first sentencing, she would have been out on parole by now.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But she wouldn't have been able to beat up that 56-year-old, 58-year-old.
exactly.
So
And like,
Silver lining.
that's awesome, I guess. Um, and she actually served the first part of the sentence in a women's prison in Nova Scotia.
they flying her across country for that?
I
Why?
guess. Hopefully driving her, because that's hell.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's the end of the trials. I'm going to give a little bit of a background for Warren Glowatsky and Kelly Ellard because I feel like we don't really get to know them in what I've presented so far other than their behavior at trials. So Warren was born April 26, 1981 in Medicine Hat, Alberta. His mom had actually gotten her tubes tied prior to this, so she was quite shocked when she got pregnant with Warren. And I will say it's kind of sad that he was never supposed to be here and this was the life that he was put here to have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, it's, yeah. Anyway, in 1996, his family moved to Nanaimo, BC, which is also on Vancouver Island, where his father worked as a welder. His mother was an alcoholic. And one summer, when he was 14 or 15, he moved to Estevan, Saskatchewan to live with his brother because his parents were fighting a lot and he just wanted to like give them a break from being parents.
Mhm.
And then when he returned, his parents got into a huge fight and they ended up splitting up and he moved with his father to Fort Victoria Park in View Royal in Victoria. And he was beaten into the Crip Mafia cartel which is the gang of misfit teenagers who idolize gangsters and violence in Victoria.
Okay.
Um, he also started calling himself Warren G, like the rapper. His father ended up moving to California at some point in 1997, but Warren decided to stay in View Royal because he had a girlfriend that he really adored. So he started staying with his buddy CF and his mom because his girlfriend's family was like, it's not really a good idea for you to move in with us.
It's
Um,
fair.
yeah. And then shortly before killing Reena, he had been kicked out of his friend's house because his friend's mom's boyfriend was getting out of prison and there wasn't going to be enough room in the house for all of them. And so he had until December to find another place to live.
That's just a really shitty situation all the way around.
Right? And something fairly interesting was supposedly a teacher or school counselor or something talked to Warren and Cyrita and was like, you guys are an example of a non-violent couple. We'd love it if you guys could go around and talk to some other classes about what it's like to be in a non-violent relationship.
Hmm.
That is so sad, knowing that they're going to
Yeah.
talk to their peers that are like 13.
Yeah. In grade 9, you're being like, it's wild to me that it was such an oddity to have a non-violent relationship that they were like, you guys are amazing role models. You need to go and share this.
Yeah.
Kind of wild. While Warren was in prison, he was encouraged to join the Victim Offender Mediation Program in 2001. He didn't really care, but by I think 2005 he did start it and was like working towards it or whatever. And Manjeet and Suman, Reena's parents, actually drove out to Mission, BC, where he was in prison, to talk to him face to face. And so it started off a little rocky, but they ended up having a great conversation and reconciling with him. And Manjeet wrote in his book, quote, my protective feelings for him developed due to his repentance. My daughter was not going to come back, but Warren had his whole life in front of him. I did not want to carry the guilt that if I chose not to forgive him, my decision might affect this young man in a negative way. I wanted him to move ahead in his life. I wanted to meet Warren halfway to give him encouragement in his efforts to change, end quote.
Hmm.
Which is so admirable because I don't know that I would be able to do that.
Yeah. No, that's
Um,
reasonable.
right? Yeah.
I don't know if I would
And
be able to either. That takes a really, really big person. That makes me believe that he's going back to like his Sikh roots because, in my experience, Sikh is a lot more empathetic and kind than Jehovah's Witness.
yes, I agree. Yeah, so it was very impressive for both him, Manji, and Suman to like forgive him. In 2004, he was denied parole, and then in 2006, he was granted temporary parole with the help of Reena's parents. They actually advocated for him, and he was granted a temporary absence of 72 hours each month unescorted. And then on June 21st, 2007, he had his second day parole hearing, and he was granted day parole so he could now live under supervision in a halfway house in Vancouver. He had to stay away from alcohol and narcotics and maintain peace at all times. When this happened, Suman told the media, quote, today I think that we see a young man who has taken responsibility for his actions and is trying to amend the wrong that he did, end quote. So they're really recognizing that he's trying to change and live a different, better life. He now works in welding and construction and lives in a supervised facility. He goes out to make speeches to kids in school and people in prison, kind of warning them against whatever happened. His parole is reevaluated every 6 months, and he meets with a parole officer every 6 weeks and can't leave the province of British Columbia. Kelly, on the other hand, was born on September 23rd, 1982. Her parents got divorced and remarried at some point during her life. She had issues at school. She was angry, confrontational, disobedient, and disruptive. At the time that this happened, she was being transferred to a new school, actually.
Hmm.
And she had a track record of bullying and beating up girls after school. Teachers were apparently aware of this and just nothing was being done.
Okay.
but I'm assuming that this transfer to a new school was maybe something that was being done about it. Apparently, her and another of her friends, I don't know who, beat up a girl so badly in the summer of 1997, so months before she killed Reena, they tried to set her hair on fire and the girl had to be hospitalized. And this girl was too scared to report this to the police, so her parents just moved her to a different school.
Huh?
What a
Yeah.
sin.
But would you not like even being hospitalized though? Do those records not hold any like? Well, I guess they wouldn't attach it to Kelly, but
Yeah. It's just her word against hers. And Kelly's this privileged white girl who's a
terrible.
manipulative psychopath. She spent her early years in prison claiming her innocence and taking illegal drugs and breaking rules. Her best friend NC finally came to the conclusion that Kelly was a manipulator in 2006 when Kelly wrote to her asking if she could testify at her parole hearing. She then tried to guilt trip her into testifying, and NC wrote to the author of Under the Bridge saying, quote, "She hurts everyone that loves her, and I'm no exception. I've lied enough for her. I've done enough. She knew how much I loved her, so she used it. She doesn't know what love is," end quote. Because NC, pretty much still to this day, won't shit talk Kelly.
Wow.
Even though Kelly has been on record multiple times shit talking NC.
Yeah. Hmm.
So it's just a weird, misplaced loyalty.
Mm-hmm.
Kelly had a psychological risk assessment in 2016 that found that she was a moderate to high moderate risk of future violence, especially if she was found to be under the influence of drugs or alcohol.
Hmm.
Even though in January 2017, she applied for parole because 2 months earlier, she had given birth to her son.
Oh.
What?
Yes, she had been allowed conjugal visits with her 41-year-old boyfriend with gang ties and a history of theft, assault, and heroin addiction, who she met while she was in prison.
Huh.
She
Romance,
was a
modern romance. You know, you
I
yeah.
just
support conjugal visits, but to an extent, I feel like you got to background check the visitor.
I also feel like they're not typically allowed for relationships that weren't pre-existing prior to imprisonment.
how do you how do you prove that though? Do you have to
I feel
prove
like
that, or
there's
you
got to
just
be
say like,
ways.
I was with this guy before?
Maybe, but she
I
was
don't know how
35 at this
conjugals work.
time, and so it's unlikely that she'd been with him for 20 years.
This is true.
His name is Darwin Dwayne DeRozan. He's a piece of shit. So she finally admitted to the crime during this parole hearing, but still lied about everything pretty much. Her parole was denied and she could retry in 6 months. In November 2017, Kelly was up for parole again and she was granted day parole. In 2018, she asked to have her
Shocking.
parole extended. And at this hearing, she had changed her name to Carrie Sim. And she spoke about separating from Darwin, who had tampered with his ankle monitor and was a suspect in a missing drug dealer's death, or just missing.
Jesus.
So they gave her 6 more months. They're like, yeah,
Mm.
go free.
6 months of parole, like day parole.
Yeah,
That's
Holy
like
shit.
that makes sense.
yeah. It
Okay.
only makes so much sense. She was given 6 more months of day parole in 2020 because she had a second child who was fathered by the same guy. And the board has, quote, "seen her change throughout the completion of numerous programs, interventions, and counseling," end quote. And motherhood has really changed her.
I don't think I believe them.
Yeah, I don't either. I'd be like, you lied at your last parole hearing. You were talking about separating from this guy, and here you are having his
There's
second
another.
kid. The separation didn't stick.
Yeah.
And so with this parole, she was allowed to live away from a residential facility for up to 5 days each week. So she only had to spend 2 days at this facility.
Damn.
In August 2021, her day parole was suspended for failing to report domestic violence. The suspension was canceled in late October 2021, and her parole was extended until March, which, like, why was it canceled?
I don't even know. This is
Yeah,
infuriating.
right? So then in 2022, they talked about giving her full parole, but it wasn't granted because she wasn't ready. And apparently she admitted that too,
That's good.
which, yeah, I was like, great.
Mm.
One out of
Um,
the how many?
yeah, she was still given day parole. She just wasn't given full parole.
Right.
Um, and then this day parole was extended in March 2024. And then she was arrested after breaching her parole conditions in January 2025. We don't really know what conditions
Wow.
she breached.
It's a
Um, and
semi-recent.
nothing has, like, I haven't found, and that's the most recent thing we know about her.
Yeah.
Also, at some point during all of this, she was brought back in front of a parole board for domestic violence, like I said, and also a positive urine test for codeine,
Oh,
which, if it's
Cool.
part of your parole
Not to be under the
restrictions,
influence.
yeah, and then you're found to be under the influence, like, maybe immediately take that away.
Hmm.
yeah.
I don't know. That's
You'd
just me.
think.
Reena's parents, Manjeet and Suman, channeled their grief into a public awareness campaign against bullying and teenage violence. They got the BC government to enact a series of anti-bullying programs in schools, and they spoke about bullying in public meetings attended by thousands of children, teachers, and law enforcement officials. In 2009, the Virks were honored with British Columbia's Anthony J. Hume Award of Distinction for their contributions to crime prevention and community safety. Sadly, Suman Virk died at the age of 58 on June 16th, 2018, after choking on food while eating in a Victoria cafe.
That's a bit of a freak accident.
Unfortunate.
Yeah. Reena's poor father, a week after Reena's body was found, his sister was stabbed to death by her partner.
Tragic.
And then
God.
Reena died. And then a couple years later, his mom died. And now his wife's dead. And he has just lived through some trauma.
Yeah,
Wow.
poor guy.
That's pretty much all I have. There's a book and TV show about this murder called Under the Bridge. The book is written by Rebecca Godfrey. It's really good. I don't know how much of it is true. She changes some very odd information to change. And I don't know if it's done in a way to keep the kids more anonymous
Mm.
or not. But anyway, and then the TV show is almost completely fictional. They kept the bare bones of the case in that. It was good to watch, though. I would recommend reading the book written by Reena's father. It's only about 200 pages long, and he does a really good job writing from the parents' point of view and addressing kind of some of the allegations of, like, you didn't do enough. Like, as her parent, you needed to do more. And they're like, well, we did everything we could.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Like, they did come out in the early 2000s, so they're not the most up to date. But Under the Bridge does have like a revision in 2019 where she goes through and adds what happened to Kelly in 2017.
Hmm.
Kind of in conclusion, I just want to end with a quote about Reena that says, quote, Reena was a typical teen who was trying to find her place and rebelling against the norms, as many do. But she did not create the circumstances of her death. She loved life and wanted to be happy. Others did not give her the chance to live and learn, end quote. And so that's pretty much everything I have to say about this. It was a really fascinating and heartbreaking case to research. I'm
Hmm.
shocked we don't know more about it. Like, it's not more widely known.
Yeah, I will say, like, because one of my friends had brought up this as a possible case to cover, and I had never heard of it before. And she was like, "Yeah, it's out in Vancouver, so it's pretty local."
Mm,
So I'm really glad that she mentioned it too. But I'm still genuinely surprised at the lack of evidence in this, because you would think too, even like discussions of a sweep of the area or conversations of a sweep of the area, seeing if there's any physical evidence under the
yeah.
bridge, around the bridge, that kind of thing.
You'd even think like the
Um,
cigarette butts because they seemed like they were chain smoking. So like
Yeah.
find the cigarettes and DNA test those.
yeah.
Right. And I just wonder if, like, Under the Bridge, I feel like in the early or late 90s, early 2000s was a very prominent place for teenagers to go and hang out. Like, I wonder if it wasn't worth their time to sift through the cigarettes there.
Fair.
Right.
And they did. There was a rumor that Kelly had smashed Rena's head into a tree. And so they did try and go find the tree, but it ended up being false. There was no blood on the tree.
Mm,
No one really knows,
Hmm.
right. Hmm.
which made it also tricky because everyone just kept lying. So they didn't know what was the truth and what was not the truth.
Yeah, that makes it tough too, especially when you can't really take court documents for fact too at that point. It's just, well, what did
Yeah.
happen? It's just word of mouth at this point.
Yeah.
But I do enjoy that, like, Rena's parents really did do a lot with public awareness and going through with like anti-bullying kind of things, and that something did come out of a horrific incident like this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Her parents sound like amazing people
Yes.
because
Yeah.
they went through that with so much more grace than I would have.
Oh boy. Yep. No, I
Yeah.
agree. Well, thank
Um,
you very much, Journey.
yeah, you're welcome.
We had a lot of information today, so I don't think we're gonna have time for a little forensic corner. We won't keep you guys, but our next topic is a very, very exciting one. We have our 100th episode coming out in 2 weeks,
Yay.
so this is kind of crazy. It's just a huge milestone for us, I guess. I don't know if we would have thought 5 years ago, almost 5 years ago, we would have hit this point. So it's kind of crazy to get there.
Mm-hmm.
But we each covered a little fun conspiracy or strange phenomenon. So we're really excited to tell you guys about that one. Similar to our housekeeping at the start, you can find us on Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, and TikTok at What the Forensics. Journey does a phenomenal job putting together some little snippets, some reels, and some videos for that. I have gotten some compliments on that. I was like,
Oh, good.
that's all Journey. She does the video editing and all that fun stuff. So
Well, I'm glad people
please,
like it.
yes. So give Journey a little round of applause whenever you see one next. But yeah. You can also go to our website at whattheforensics.ca. This is your one-stop shop. We have all of our sources there. We try and update that as frequently as we can. Source images and, if applicable, and recommendations in terms of books and whatnot. And our email is whattheforensics@gmail.com. We have surprisingly been hearing from a good few of you about like recommendations and things to take a look for. So keep your eyes peeled in the upcoming weeks, and maybe one of those topics will be an episode. But with that being said, this has been another episode of What the Forensics. We hope you learned something today. We hope you enjoyed your time with us learning, and we will see you next time.
Bye.
Just a reminder to everyone that we are not professionals in the forensic science field. We are just interested in forensics and want to share what we are learning with our listeners. We're trying to give you the most accurate information, but we are human and can make mistakes. Thank you so much for listening, and we hope to see you next week.